Easter has come, yet the message is stay home. And perhaps much depends on how we hear that. It may appear an invitation or a command. We are aware of the renewal of the restrictions, so we're invited to stay home, to remain isolated, and we are aware of restrictions and a fear of what's out there. We want to protect ourselves. But when we think of the apostles following the death of Jesus, there are many similar aspects to how they were. They were vulnerable. They went behind locked doors. They isolated themselves. They had a fear of what was outside. And yet they had to go through that. You might say for them there were external doors and internal doors. The external ones were obvious in locking themselves away. But the message of Christ was much more to get through the internal doors. The things that closed them off to the profound message he wanted to share with them. You can think of the famous phrase in Revelations, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." This was Jesus desiring to find a place in their lives, in their homes, and in their hearts. Jesus offering something very new, something very radical. Because in Jesus' appearances, closed doors were never an obstacle. You have instances of that in chapter 20 of John, appearing to them, offering a message of peace and hope beyond closed minds and closed doors, that they might be able to embrace what was new. Because the resurrection is essentially about something new. It's not just about Jesus coming back to life. It's about Jesus going through death to new life. And that's very much the gift offered us. Jesus wants to be invited in. And we know in our lives we can lock Jesus in or lock him out. We can seek to keep him confined or seek to keep him isolated. But his message is much deeper than that, drawing us into a new relationship of life and of love. So what's all this saying to me at this time, at Easter at this time? Because it certainly has been a different Easter. Being aware of being without many of the things I would have taken for granted. We would have been running retreats. We would have had a large number of people here. We would have had elaborate ceremonies that would be rich in their meaning and significance. This time, it's a quieter place. And it's invited more reflection, more prayer, and inviting to say, what are the doors that are significant in my life? There are doors that divide, there are doors that isolate, but there are doors that can be opened. So I was asking myself, do I see this as a time of isolation? Do I see it as a form of imprisonment? And that struck me initially. But now I'm focused much more on the invitation of this time. It's more an invitation to solitude and contemplation, to quiet in the Lord to a time with the Lord, to see the deeper and the more enduring meaning, to get beyond the ordinary doors, to find what's in the door of my heart that's opened out more fully to the Lord. So it's a little bit like saying, where am I finding resurrection now? And I'm struck in two ways on that. Walking around here and seeing the grass growing, the trees coming into full foliage, the wildflowers blooming, the squirrels and the badgers still around. And even the young squirrels remind me there is new life. Life is unfolding. Spring is growing into summer. But also I'm seeing signs of resurrection in the response of people. The generous response of people to the plight of others. Whether it's medical or whether it's at the very ordinary social level. Good neighbours reaching out, providing for others, caring for them, indicating their concern in ordinary, simple and everyday ways. These are to me the little resurrections that point to the bigger resurrection of Christ. Because it remains a world of open and closed doors. There are many closed doors in our world and our society. We might think of the attitude that some can take toward asylum seekers and refugees. There are closed doors to people living in certain places or applying for certain jobs. This resurrection invites to look beyond my own blindness, the ways in which I can imprison myself, that I can close myself off, to open myself out beyond the limitations that are imposed, to what I really want to be, how I want to grow, how I want to live. Because the invitation of Easter is we are called onwards. We're not going back, we're going forward. The disciples didn't go back, they were brought to a new way of being. They had a new vision of life, a new horizon from which to work, a message to be proclaimed in a new way. But that's very much the same invitation to me and to all of us. How are we open to the gift of God at this time? Because it's interesting, if you look through the early chapter of Acts, you have the apostles at different times they're imprisoned. Open doors and closed doors. But in some of those stories what you find is it's the jailers who are more imprisoned than the apostles. They were led out, they were led onward. They didn't see that physical imprisonment as a limitation, but rather as an opportunity and an opening that would allow them to be witnesses to what they had experienced. And Easter is the same for us. How do we let the Lord in, to let the Lord have a space in our lives and in our hearts, to allow others to have time there too, because they are witnesses also. They are our companions on the journey. So this is a time to look at the open and closed doors of our lives and to find what our attitudes are toward them. Doors that can divide, because doors can always do that. But you have a choice on how we are with them. We can make ourselves prisoners, or we can make them openings and opportunity. But essentially we're asked to be messengers of hope, to be witnesses of resurrection, to open doors in the name of Christ, and to be able to welcome him and to welcome others in his name. Because this is a time for opening doors. It's a time for leaving an empty tomb. It's a time for moving on, knowing that we're called forward in hope, and knowing that the Lord is with us in that. Now, if you'd like to pray and reflect on this, there are some texts that come to mind for me. Revelations chapter 3 verse 20 is that phrase, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." And Holman Hunt painted a lovely painting on that as Christ with a lantern outside, but the only latch on the door was on the inside. Christ wants to be welcomed in beyond the closed doors of our lives. If you look at chapters 4 and 5 of Acts, you find stories of the apostles in prison. But it's an opening to the new rather than a closing off. And there's nice pieces in chapter 20 of John where Christ appeared to the disciples behind closed doors. It wasn't an impediment to them, and he set them free that it did not become an impediment for them. So I pray that this Easter season will open doors for you. They may be physical doors closed, but the door of your heart remains open, and we're invited then to leave that open to the Lord and to others. May you have a blessed Easter.